show you've all been waiting for. A tour of exchange rate management brought to you by Team 9, the Eagle Scouts.
For the talent part of the show, we will be talking to you about the exchange rates and the Asian financial crisis.
A stable exchange rate is imperative to achieving sustainable real growth, given its pervasive impact across both the private and public sector. Exchange rate management has been especially difficult in emerging markets, where large capital outflows can potentially paralyze the economy. A stark example of this is the Asian financial crisis. Let's try and unpack the historical failings of emerging market currency management during this crisis and analyse the lessons it teaches us for preventing future crises. Take it away, Rochelle.
From 1997 to 1998, the Asian financial crisis affected several Southeast Asian economies, namely the tiger economies, and resulted in severe currency devaluations and capital flight. The chain of events were arguably set up and triggered by factors relating to the exchange rates, and the crisis underscored several structural flaws within these markets. Many of these nations were net lenders, reflected by large, persistent current account deficits. These were largely a result of extreme imbalances in net income, and foreign investment domestically exceeded the country's investment overseas. Moral hazard also played a large role. Governments provided public guarantees for private projects as they wanted to maintain high growth levels, and this gave central banks free rein to borrow money from foreign countries and lend domestically. A net income deficit means that there is a net outflow of service payments for this debt, the majority of which is dollar denominated. If, for example, a currency halved in value to the dollar, the value of dollar debt effectively doubles. In addition, these nations had currencies that were de facto pegged against the US dollar. When maintained, this reduces exchange rate risk, as it makes rates more predictable. However, deep foreign reserves are needed. When the US hiked interest rates to counteract their own domestic inflation, these economies found it harder to maintain the rates as they had to sell foreign currencies and purchase their domestic currencies to keep in line with US dollar appreciation. Furthermore, their investments suffered as they became less competitive.
The second problem with these exchange rate regimes became evident when exposure to exchange rate speculation in 1997 led to immense capital outflows from Thailand, as investors believed that baht was overvalued and that the government could not maintain the valuation. This capital flight soon spread to other, similarly unstable and overvalued Asian economies. For governments, maintaining the currency valuation was imperative for one overarching reason: foreign or dollar-denominated debt. Everyone, please look at the screen now.
Indeed, this graph shows the relationship between interest rates and exchange rates for the tiger economies prior to, during, and after the Asian financial crisis.
First of all, many of these Asian governments had a large portion of dollar-denominated debt that would skyrocket in value inversely to the value of the currency. Moreover, many of the largest banks in these countries not only had dollar-denominated debt, but also had a number of risky loans as a means of stimulating growth and investment. It is worth to note that investment was as much as 30% of GDP in many of the tiger economies. So this means that, first, debt was more expensive, and second, income to service the debt was eroding.
To maintain the exchange rate valuation and simultaneously the stability of their domestic economy, these countries had two options. The first was to prevent capital outflows, which would freeze equilibrium. In the near term, this is difficult. A large portion of investment was portfolio investment, and positions could be swiftly liquidated. Malaysia only put this into place after the ringgit had lost 50% of its value, and the KLSE had lost more than 50% of its value from above 1200 to under 600. The second option was to match capital outflow with inflow, or stimulate demand for the domestic currency. This could be done in two ways. The first was to use foreign reserves to equalize the capital flight and maintain the currency. Everyone, please look at the screen. From the graph, you can see that as the quantity of the emerging market currency demanded falls from Q1 to Q2, the central bank would sell foreign reserves in an attempt to push quantity demanded back to Q1. As an immediate course of action, only countries like Singapore and Hong Kong, whose 80 billion in foreign reserves, equivalent to 700% of its M3 money supply, were capable of this. Other countries such as Thailand and South Korea with substantially depleted foreign reserves had to approach the IMF for a bailout. For countries such as the Philippines and Malaysia, they had to immediately resort to the other, more drastic option, which involves hiking domestic interest rates to counter the outflow and provide investors with returns. By stimulating foreign investment into the local currency, the value of the currency would rise. Everyone, please look at the screen. From the graph, we can see that a decrease in the real money supply from M1 over P to M2 over P would cause an increase in the domestic interest rate. The rise in domestic interest rates causes the rate of return received in the domestic currency relative to the dollar to increase from R1 to R2. The greater demand for domestic currency causes it to appreciate relative to the dollar from E1 to E2. However, raising domestic interest rates was also problematic. Maintaining high domestic interest rates was a strategy implemented by several governments prior to the financial crisis to attract foreign investment. Indeed, in 1996, the lending rate in the Philippines was already 14.84%. Further hikes placed downward pressure on economic growth and drove these economies into recession.
The Asian financial crisis underscored several flaws with the peg rate, and foreign investment poured into these economies partially due to the fact that the economy's underlying health was masked by the false impression that their currencies were stable. Regarding the ideal exchange rate regime, the truth is that it is very dependent on each economy's characteristics. One potential solution going forward involves closely monitoring the ratio of short-term debt and foreign liabilities to current reserves to preserve a country-specific coverage ratio. The case of Thailand highlights that a rising foreign reserve is not sufficient if short-term debt also rises at a faster rate. The other important point is the impossible trinity. Countries cannot have a managed exchange rate, free movement of capital, and an independent monetary policy. The answer to the ideal exchange rate regime could be determined by the extent that emerging market central banks can manage certain characteristics that indicate a currency crisis may occur. These include 1. Drastic decline in foreign exchange rate reserves, 2. Inflation hikes, 3. Deteriorating terms of trade, 4. A real exchange rate that is much higher than the mean reverting level, 5. Equity markets experience a boom-bust cycle, 6. Money supply relative to bank reserves increases, and 7. Nominal private credit growth.
We hope you enjoyed the show. Please give a round of applause to our esteemed speakers. Last but certainly not least, let's give a big round of applause to our amazing chef Amin, who made the delicious margaritas that you're all eating. Tonight wouldn't be possible without him. Alrighty then. Thanks a lot. Have a good night.